All right, so we're going to look at 50 game-changing podcasting tips in 15 minutes. And me reacting, commenting to these might make this a little bit long, so we might break this up in two parts. We'll see. But let's go ahead and play the video.
Hey, it's Pat Flynn here, and I've been podcasting for 12, 13 years now, a very long time. Anyway, I'm here to give you 50 podcasting tips in 15 minutes. Let's do this.
Real quick, Pat Flynn was probably the inspiration for me starting Podcast Insights, which is now one of the largest podcasting education websites out there. And he started, 12, 13 years ago, and I probably started 2015, so maybe 7 years ago, so half the amount of time. He has a ton more experience and knowledge and just a great person to learn from. We've partnered on stuff in the past. I've promoted his courses. So I love that I can help contribute to his channel and just learn from him as well.
To start off, mention other podcasts on your show. Why? Because when people subscribe to those podcasts, your podcast will show up under related podcasts on their podcast pages on Apple. And what's cool is you can get new listeners just by doing that, even if you're not a guest on their podcast. The best.
Wow. So right off the bat is one I don't even think I knew about. So if you mention other podcasts, then your podcast will show up as a related one. I know that Apple uses some data based on who listens to similar podcasts in the back end, and then they'll show shows that are similar. But I didn't know that if you mention other ones, that also impacts their algorithm. They do have some automatic transcription, so maybe that's part of how they get that info, but that's interesting right off the bat.
Best length of your podcast, as far as how long it should be exactly how long it needs to be for the value that you want to give. Just provide value, and that's the biggest thing you should worry about.
I say the same thing. Don't worry about length, whether it's 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. Just do whatever makes sense. Try to, cut out any fluff, get right into the content, similar to YouTube. And just like you said, provide value. Great tip. Number 2.
Podcast artwork is very important. Actually, it's one of the only things besides the title of your show that people see before they make a decision to go and listen to your podcast and potentially subscribe. Most important, just make sure that as you design it, it looks good, even small on a little screen. That's really important because most people listening are, in fact, on a mobile device.
So what's interesting is you actually design your podcast cover art in a really large format, 3,000 by 3,000 pixels, but then that just allows you to display it anywhere, whether it's on an iPad, a computer, or like you said, on your phone. So when you create it really large, but use extra large text font so that it's easy to read. Don't add a ton of tiny details, and then make sure you test it. Look at it on a phone, look at it really small, get it down to 150 pixels and see if it's readable and if it's easily able to be recognizable just at a quick glance. That's some good tip there.
Best way to grow your podcast and get discovered is to be a guest on another person's podcast. Listeners' apps are already open. It's more easy to find you, and they hear your voice. And not only that, you are getting endorsed by the host that has spent all this time building trust with that audience. There's no better way to do it. If you want
Exactly what he said. You already have a built-in audience. People that listen to podcasts obviously know how to and like to listen to podcasts. So being on another podcast in a similar industry is a great way to grow your own show.
Want to be a guest on another podcast, start with people who you know first, people who have a podcast, of course. If you see a podcast that you might want to be on, but you don't know that person, try to get an introduction and find somebody who knows both of you. Tell more stories. People absolutely love stories. Even if you're teaching, even if it's something technical, tell a story. Stories get remembered, and they're more likely to get shared. Invest in a great...
He's an expert on stories. I'm constantly learning from him as, how to... It could be something simple. You can relate something your dog did earlier in the day or your kid or something. Turn that into a teachable moment and relate it to your industry. You can... create a bank of stories too. So write down a few that you kind of go back to, especially if you're on an interview with another show. That way you can keep repeating the same ones over and over. And typically you won't sound too repetitive because a lot of people won't listen to you everywhere. They might just hear you in one place. So it's okay to tell the same story over and over again.
Microphone. Audio is the most important thing when it comes to podcasting. Obviously, even if it's a video podcast, and a microphone will make all the difference in the world. My top recommended microphones are in the description, ranging from cheap prices that sound great to nice, expensive, very high quality podcast microphones like this one. When you speak into the mic,
Great tips there. You don't have to spend a ton to have awesome audio quality, but you do want to invest a little bit. Make sure you get an XLR-based mic if you can. And I have tons of recommendations on the website as well. Most of them tend to overlap because, they are good choices. The Audio Technica that he mentioned, there's a Samson Q2U. I'm personally using a Rode, Rodecaster Pro right now to record this. And I have tons of articles I'll link up in the description that you can check out for podcast mic recommendations.
microphone, speak about a fist lengths away, unless you are this guy, in which case maybe you want to be half a fist lengths away for the best quality sound. Use
Pretty good.
the shock mount to hold your microphone. It actually kind of suspends the microphone in the air. These little rubber bands here absorb any sort of vibrations from your desk or your computer fans or anything like that, so you don't get like humming noises inside your audio. Get it and make
Awesome. I have a shock mount here. I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like a little spider web thing. So definitely do that. It helps, especially if you like knock on a desk or something, that audio won't get transferred through the stand or through the desk into the microphone. It suspends it, lets it kind of rattle around there in free space.
Make sure it's the right size for your microphone before you purchase it. Next, get a mic flag for your podcast microphone. It's really cool because it has your brand and your logo on it, this little cube here. You can get it at impactpbs.com. And yes, obviously people listening don't know it's there. However, if you do happen to turn on the camera for a video podcast, it is there. It is branded to your show. And it just looks cool. It makes you feel professional. And that comes across in your podcast audio.
You'll see these on, news stations always use these when they're interviewing people. They'll have a little mic flag. I don't have one, but maybe that's something I should look into getting. That's a good tip.
Batch process your podcast episode production. What that means is when you sit down to record a podcast, try to attempt to get more than one episode done at a time. This way you can get ahead and not fall into the trap of the content hamster wheel that we've all felt before, where you feel that pressure of the next episode, which just is not a great place to be.
Batch recording is awesome because you can just knock out, 3, 4, 5 episodes at once. And then the next time you sit down, you can edit them all and schedule them, and then you'll be ahead maybe a month or more. So that's a great tip. It's not something I would do from day one. I would just figure out your process, get things kind of figured out, how to edit, how to record, all that stuff. But then once you have a few episodes under your belt, definitely take up that tip and try batch recording.
In order to do that, you need to, in this tip, plan ahead. Actually put time in your calendar, block out time to plan ahead and come up with the content ideas for your future episodes. This honestly has been one of the biggest things when it comes to revolutionizing my podcast production and just like fun with podcasting. When you edit your podcast, don't worry about removing too many mistakes. Yes, obviously, if you make a big mistake or sneeze or something, but removing every breath and every just takes up too much time. Plus, the final product doesn't actually sound like normal human speech. It sounds fast and it doesn't sound natural. When you get on a call with a
I agree. I've tried to do this. If you edit too much, it, like you said, it'll sound fast, and you'll actually cut out little breaths and things, and it'll sound funny. It won't sound realistic. So definitely agree. Try not to make every little edit that you can. Just take out major mistakes or redos or, something that might be annoying, but otherwise try to keep in as much as you can.
the guests, number one, make sure they feel as comfortable as possible. I always tell my guests immediately that I'm not recording. It makes them feel like, okay, we're not having to be on yet. And secondly, I use this sort of script, and you're welcome to take it from me. And that is, let's just pretend we're at a coffee shop having a conversation. The audience, they're just a fly on the wall. We don't need to worry about them. I just want to get to know you and understand more about what you got going on. When a guest is comfortable, it's more likely to be a great interview.
I have heard him do this when we have done some webinars together. He has used that exact script, and it's great. It just makes it so you're not focusing on everyone else. It's just you two chatting, and really kind of takes the pressure off. So great tip there.
Now, if you are recording a remote interview, like on your computer, do not use Zoom. Zoom will give you compressed audio. It doesn't sound great. You want the best audio quality possible on both sides, and that comes from places like squadcast.fm. That's a tool I use.
Yeah, that's my buddy Albin there from Buzzsprout, by the way.
Full disclosure, I'm an affiliate. There's my link right now. And I'm also an advisor to the company. I wouldn't be if I didn't use this product and love it. And I use it for every single podcast interview I do. And it's great. Now, when you've had your podcast up for a while, go to your podcast page on Apple. Scroll down to the bottom where you find your related podcast. These are other shows that your listeners are actually listening to. That's great insight to discover what else they're listening to, but it's also a great conversation starter when you reach out to those podcasters and say, hey, we have shared audiences. Let's maybe collab. And it's a good spot to go to find guest podcasting opportunities.
Exactly. Do what he said. And back to the previous tip. If you already have Zoom and you don't want to pay for another service, go ahead and try it out. It is a good starting point, but if that, you'll find some limitations there. So if you can do what he says, go Squadcast, or there's other services, Riverside, Iris, things like that, that will be great options to record solely for podcasting, and that's what they're designed for.
Analytics are really important to understand, and from your host server, you can see the total number of downloads that you get. Pay attention to trends over time. You want to obviously make sure you are increasing in downloads, and if not, you might want to make a change. In addition to that, look at the episode downloads and see which ones get more downloads than others. This is an opportunity to discover which topics your audience seems to love and enjoy, and an opportunity for you to discover what to do more of in the future. Also, pay attention to the retention graphs that Apple Podcasts or Google Podcast Analytics will give you. If you see a huge dip or worse, just like a cliff dive, well, that means that people lost interest at that point, and you might want to go back and listen to those moments and go, well, what did I do there, and not do that again. Now, if you're looking for a large number...
Good tips there on analytics. I know that you can really get into the weeds and spend, too much time diving into every little thing. So I think it's good to review some of that stuff, but I wouldn't get overwhelmed in it. Go ahead, put out episodes, make connections, get on other podcasts, and then go back and look at your analytics and stuff after you've had a few months of production to see how things are going there. And then also don't be afraid to ask your audience, get some feedback. If you, whether it's on social media or you have an email list or something, go ahead and ask them and just see what they have to say.
Number of downloads in a short period of time. One of my favorite ways to do it is called bursting. Maybe you publish 5 episodes in 5 days in a row, just for that short period of time. You'll get more downloads, you'll get more opportunities to offer call to actions, and if it ties to a promo, even better. If you're talking about something visual...
I don't think I've heard that term before, bursting, but I like the idea. I think I've done something similar when I was maybe launching a course or something. You put out, normally if your cadence is once a week, but you want to kind of promote something, you might do it 5 days in a row, like you said, to kind of push that topic and educate people around that thing that you're trying to promote. That's a good idea. It might also be a good way to kind of mix things up. You have a normal cadence, and then all of a sudden you want to do a different format. So you try a Q&A or like a special interview or something. You can intersperse those as well. That's a interesting one that I haven't necessarily heard mentioned before.
On your podcast, do yourself a favor and pop that visual, that thing that you want people to look at that they can't because they're listening, onto a website and make it easy for them to go there. That's going to be enticing enough for them to go there because they're listening to the podcast, and now they're on your website. You can collect an email. You can offer them something else. Visuals on your website for things that you talk about on your audio podcast. Now, when you mention...
Good tip there. I know it's a lot of extra work to have a website publish a blog post about it, but it definitely is a great place to have a good idea to have a website to send people to, because it gives them not only the visuals, like you said, but listening options. So whether you want to, send them to Spotify or Apple or something, people will find your show and your website in different ways. So it's good to kind of connect all those things and tie them together and give people options as to how to listen, how to read, how to understand what you're talking about in this example. So great idea there. Canva is a great resource if you want to create some images. It's free, or they have a little paid program, but for the most part, it should be easy to use, and good tip there.
Links, don't mention too many all at once. The problem is people are often on the go, in the car, at the gym, wherever, and they don't have the opportunity to write all those links down. And actually, if the links are also complicated and hard to remember, well, it's never going to work. So 1, maybe 2 offers of links, but make sure they're also easy to remember. You might even want to get a GoDaddy link so that it's easy and it forwards to that particular place that you want them to go. Next, build an email.
Good tip there. he's referring to calls to action. So usually you want to just mention one thing. So that might just be subscribe to the show, and you don't say, hey, go to this website or buy this thing or check out this course or whatever. Just try to stick to one thing per episode and repeat it. Repeat it for a week, a month, and you kind of need to have that repetitiveness for people to take action, because like you said, people are busy and they might even think, oh, I should do this, and then they forget about it. So the next time they listen, they hear it again and they're like, oh, I need to do this. And then the third time they listen, they finally are like, oh yeah, I meant to do this, and they actually do it. And they might be in a better place or near a computer or something where they can check out whatever it is that you mentioned. So be sure and repeat those calls to action, but don't have too many per episode.
Email list. It's the best way to understand who is in your audience, and you need to entice them with something like a lead magnet, maybe a gift of some kind in order to exchange for their email. But once you do that, you have direct access, personal access to people who are listeners. Those are people who can offer you valuable feedback, who can offer you insight on what else they might need help with, and that informs what other podcast episodes you can create and create a better experience for all your listeners. Along the same lines, and you can use your email list for this, try to have a conversation with one listener per month and ask them questions like what they love about the show, what do they wish was there, what kinds of episodes would be more interesting to them than what's available, and ask them why. When you can understand not just what they might need help with and their challenges, but also hear the language and hear the stories that they're telling about those struggles or challenges, well, you're going to be more inclined to create better episodes because you have a real person in mind, not a made-up avatar or anything like that. Now, sometimes it's a
Good tip there. So back to the email list thing, I think that's crucial. You will need a website to make this as effective as possible to collect email addresses. But like I said, you can use that to ask questions of your audience, offer products, services, courses, you name it, and create, let people know about new episodes. There's tons of things you can do with an email list. So definitely highly recommend that as soon as you can. And it kind of ties into the website thing, the feedback, it all, like we mentioned before. So definitely do that. And then that was a good tip there about talking to one person. So this is more of a one-on-one kind of interview, maybe not interview, but understanding your customer and really kind of diving deep. So that's a more, I think it's a little more work, obviously, but it's more advanced. I don't think people do that. So that could be a great tip to really get some great information and stand out.
As a podcaster, you might need to take a break. Maybe you are overwhelmed or you just didn't have time or life gets in the way sometimes. When you come back to your podcast, don't make a huge deal about it. Don't apologize. Maybe mention the why, but then get right onto it and provide value right up front. People are going to not even remember that you were gone and be ready for the next episodes that come out. Next, pivoting is okay. If you want to make a decision to change the name of your show or your artwork or maybe even the direction of it, that's totally okay, and it happens all the time. Your podcast isn't permanent ever, and you can always change things. You can always upload new episodes and replace episodes or delete old ones. So don't feel like you have to be perfect right away. You got to be a disaster before you become the master, and over time, you might change direction, and that's okay. Next, always remember.
All right, so for tip 25, you can pivot, change things. I have done this on podcast. My podcast used to be called Set Sail, and then I changed it to Podcasting Simplified, changed the artwork. I've changed formats before, and definitely recommend this. You kind of evolve and improve over time. So don't be afraid to get started, put something out there, and then, as you go, it might make sense to change your episode format even, or your cadence, go from once a week to twice a week or opposite. So tons of things you can do. Like you said, nothing is permanent. So just go ahead and get started, get your podcast out there, and we'll pick up with the second half of these tips in part 2.